Greetings, loyal listeners! Today is Sunday, January 14th, 2024, and this is a special edition of the Real Context News Podcast with your host, yours truly, Brian Frydenborg, the founder and creator of Real Context News. And we have some important domestic politicking to be talking about. I know I've been focused in large part, but not fully, on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the current horrific violence in Gaza. But today, we're going to be talking a lot about Iowa, but not just Iowa. We're going to be talking about the whole 2024 political calendar as far as the U.S. presidential race and elections coming up. And I'm going to give you a roadmap for how I think this thing's going to go. And I've been thinking this for some time. Some of the details are a bit more apparent now. How Trump's competitors are going to go down are less important than the fact that I've been saying from the beginning that DeSantis was going nowhere. Yeah, he did great in Florida against an ex-Republican turned Democrat that was not a terribly strong candidate. And the thing is, DeSantis could do well in Florida, but Florida ain't the country. He just has no real personality or charisma. I saw him trying to smile at the end of an interview today with Jake Tapper, and it looked like he was having a proctology exam. He was just trying to smile, and it's just, there are certain things, of the Republicans who were above 1 and 2%, Chris Christie was easily my favorite with the way he was campaigning against Trump. But there are some realities. I'm not trying to be mean. I should be careful what language I use, but I'll just say, if you look like William Howard Taft in 2024, in a very media-driven, image-driven society that we have now, it's not going to happen. Chris Christie was just too big. Ron DeSantis has a terrible personality. He just doesn't come off good at all. And almost all the issues he's fighting on are culture war nonsense that are targeting very vulnerable communities, whether they're trans people or migrants or whoever, in a vicious way that is dehumanizing and dangerous and has actually led to harm coming to these people of these communities. I mean, taking over Disney over LGBTQ plus rights and having a public school curriculum that talks about how slavery was good for black people because it taught them skills, and book banning, I believe, Shakespeare. I'll post some articles about this in the notes section, but if you're banning Shakespeare, you're not the governor of the future. So, and it's not so much, this is the environment he has fostered in the state. There are people who don't feel safe educating their children in Florida. It's a very set of vicious, oppressive laws. They're dehumanizing. He doesn't have anything about the economy to talk about. His COVID policy was terrible. They had a very high death rate in Florida. It didn't work out. He just brought a lot of fanatics who were Trump supporters, and even though a lot of them died, a lot of them didn't. And so the state lurched to the right, for sure. But the point is, I said from the beginning, if you really think DeSantis, from the beginning of his candidacy, from when people were talking about the fact that he was going to run, I was like, bring it on. This guy's not going to do anything. There's no way. And Bill Maher, I think, said it best, actually, early on. Who wants the cover band when you can have the original act? And the same goes for Vivek Ramaswamy, although he gets points, I guess, for being much more youthful and energetic than Trump's competition. But DeSantis is trying to be Trump 2.0, and Vivek Ramaswamy, is trying to be Trump 3.0. And it's ironic that the darkest skinned person still in the race is the one trying to out-racist Trump on racism. It's really remarkable. Although Nikki Haley, sure, with her answer on slavery and her trying to have it both ways for many years in South Carolina. How does a woman of color win in South Carolina as a Republican candidate for governor? By not telling the truth about the Civil War, by really speaking both sides out of, Anyway, I'll try to keep this G-rated since we had a little bit of colorful swearing with my amazing podcast with Staff Sergeant Aquilino Gonell, who helped defend us all on the Capitol grounds on January 6, 2021. You can catch that for sure, parental advisory, but very worth it. And if your kids can handle a little bit of swearing, worth it for them too, if you deem they can. And he's one of the 4 police officers there that day that testified to the January 6th committee and has been very outspoken about the threat that Donald Trump presents to democracy. But anyway, I digress. But, we've got an interesting race where from the beginning I've been saying Trump, it's a cult. It's a personality cult. Trump owns the party. There's no party. It just serves to fulfill his wishes and to promote him. That's the main national level party at this point. You can find different people at different local and state and county levels with different agendas, but the national level party is a sycophantic, fascistic personality cult. It's not fascistic, it's fascist at this point. That embraces violence, embraces racism, wants to take your right to, as a woman, make your own decisions about your bodily autonomy when it comes to pregnancy, child rearing, and maternal health. There's all kinds of great things they're campaigning on. Deporting millions of immigrants who are mostly law-abiding, wonderful citizens who work their ass off to make this country a better place so they can build a future for their family, and they want desperately to be part of this country. Like Aquilino Gonell, by the way, in my podcast, a Dominican immigrant who served in Iraq in the war and then served us on the grounds of the Capitol that day, that horrible day when Trump tried to destroy, well, he did destroy the peaceful transition of power going back to 1797 when Adams took over after George Washington. So, here we are with DeSantis being basically a non-factor at this point. But then you have Nikki Haley, who's risen up in the polls, which kind of makes sense because of the other candidates. Tim Scott's been gone for a while now. He wasn't going anywhere. You got Chris Christie, who he actually was the best candidate among the people. But he was the most hated out of all the Republicans hated by Republicans. He's not popular with Republicans. You can't win a Republican primary if you're not popular with Republicans. He's popular with independents. That's why he had some traction in New Hampshire and was gaining a bit there. But Haley seemed to have really taken the moderate lane, which is disappointing because she really isn't. There is a perception that she's moderate, which is nonsense, but, relative to Trump, okay. Now, DeSantis, Ramaswamy, and Trump are all awful extremists. She's just a kind of still extremist, but just not in the as vile a way that these other 3 are. And Christie was the only candidate that had any stature because, Asa Hutchinson seems like a really decent guy relative to a lot of these other people. He has been nowhere in the polls and is not a presence at all. He's not going anywhere. Humane guy who was governor extended Medicaid when a lot of the Republicans resisted that. He's against targeting trans people the way some of these other people do. So, he's been outspoken on this, but Christie was the only one with any force behind him, forcefully criticizing Donald Trump as unfit to be to be president. Forcefully criticizing Donald Trump as unfit to be president. And what I was telling a friend of mine just before it was announced he was going to drop out, and then he gave his speech. It's the best speech of any Republican in this political cycle, and one of the better speeches in American politics in recent years, along with a few of Joe Biden's. But his speech echoed exactly what I was saying to my friend, large parts of what I was saying anyway. And what I was saying was that, listen, Donald Trump is a fascist existential threat to the United States Constitution, to our democratic republic and system of governance, democracy itself, and to the rule of law. Anything else, whatever the other issues are, I don't care if you're running for county dog catcher, I don't care if you're running for president, I don't care if you're running for senator, congressman, governor, state representative, state attorney general, whatever it is, the first thing that matters is whether or not you're going to defend the Constitution of the United States. That's the first part of your oath. The Constitution, the democracy we have, the rule of law, voting rights, those important kind of things, that they're the bedrock of our entire society, and that if we do not have those, we don't have a country. We have chaos, we have violence, we have instability, we have anarchy, we have not democracy, whatever we have. If you don't if you don't recognize Donald Trump is a threat to all of those and seeks to undo and destroy all of those, you're really stupid and have no business running for any political office. But a lot of these people we're talking about, even though I don't think DeSantis and Haley are geniuses, or Ramaswamy is a genius, I don't think they're, at least in terms of their mental capacity, terribly stupid people. They know better. They're lying. They're playing you. If you're a Republican voter or a Trump supporter, they're playing you. They're trying, just like when Haley knew the Civil War was definitely about slavery, but she tried to hem and haw and make it sound like it was about other things. She was doing what you call pandering. She knows a lot of Trump's base are white racists. She knew to be a governor of South Carolina, she had to win white racists by protecting the Confederate flag in the beginning when she first ran. Wasn't an awful thing. Oh, it's pride and heritage for some people. Oh, it was about states' rights. It was about different societies. No, it was about slavery. Sorry. Fail. So there's that. She knows better. DeSantis, maybe he really is. I don't know. I think he knows better too. He was a JAG, a Judge Advocate General with the military, deployed to Iraq. He understands the concept of the rule of law. He is pandering. Vivek is pandering. And what Christie said, number one, Donald Trump is absolutely unfit to be president of the United States of America because of his threat to our republic and the Constitution. He said, and as I was saying to my friend just before he gave the speech, that the greatest threat to our country since the Civil War is Trumpism right now. It's not external threats. It's not terrorists. It's not the Soviet Union. It was first the Civil War where we faced this. This is why it's so important that Haley got this wrong and what it says about her and her unfitness for office, which I said. But I've been saying for years now that he's the greatest threat to our country since the rebel, traitorous, secessionist, quote-unquote Confederate Army tried to overthrow this government. Marched by the tens of thousands, the hundreds of thousands against our boys in blue, our Union troops, our federal, United States, and state regiments. Really. But again, Trump, greatest threat to this country since the Civil War, since secessionists and a competing, serious, powerful army literally marched on Washington and tried to destroy our constitutional order to perpetuate a fascist slaveocracy throughout the whole of the country. Or most of it. If you can't recognize that, and you're not willing, or you're not willing to say it out loud, but you know that's the truth. Chris Christie and again, I said this just before he did, I said, anyone who, like, the only thing that matters in politics before everything else, and you can then debate everything else after this, is if you are against, you're either for the Constitution, for rule of law, for democracy in our republic, free and fair elections, or you're for Trump and his movement and you're against those things. You may perceive it to be different, but that doesn't make it true. Either you're for a constitution or you're with Trump. You cannot pick both. It's one or the other. And if you're not on the side of the Constitution, which would be the oath that we take, if we take any federal office, and most and probably all state offices, is to protect and defend the United States Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So, anyone who doesn't take that clear stance, anybody who doesn't take that clear stance is unfit for office because they are moral cowards who are unwilling to prioritize the very first part of their oath and the very first part of their duty. Again, that makes them inherently unfit. This is exactly what Christie was saying. He ain't used quite the same strong language I did. He didn't use the word fascist. But he said, Donald Trump's unfit, and if you can't say he's unfit, then you're unfit. So that's Nikki. That's Ron. That's Vivek. These people are not fit for office, and we have now lost Christie as a voice that can garner much attention anymore since he dropped out. Unless he might be willing to make some endorsement at some point, and it's probably not going to be any of those people I just mentioned. I'm hoping he'll endorse Biden at some point. We'll see. But the point is, a long time ago, Ulysses Grant, beginning of the Civil War, wrote a letter. This is what he wrote. And I have it in an article of mine. I'm going to post it because we're in a dichotomy where this is what matters first and foremost. Quote, this is from April 21st, 1861. Quote, we are now in the midst of trying times when everyone must be for or against his country and show his colors too by his every act. Whatever may have been my political opinions before, I have but one sentiment now. That is, we have a government and laws and a flag, and they must all be sustained. There are but two parties now, traitors and patriots, and I want hereafter to be ranked with the latter, and I trust the stronger party. I would never stultify my opinion for the sake of a little security. But that's exactly, end quote, that's exactly what Vivek, and especially Ron and Nikki, who are much more important than Vivek, that's exactly what they're doing. They're doing exactly what Grant says he would never do, and they're basically in the category of traitors. So this is, again, Christie didn't quite go that far, but he basically said they're unfit for office if they won't call Trump out as unfit, because Trump is an existential threat to our system and our life is the way we know it. And he even called out the public and the voters, saying, listen, we have a chance, like we did during the Civil War, to protect and defend our country against this very serious domestic threat. And time will tell if we do it this time around. And if we don't, we're really blowing what this country has been and losing what made it great. And he quoted that great Ben Franklin quote that Nancy Pelosi loves to quote, when a woman not bugged him, but asked Franklin, what you have for us, essentially, right after the Constitutional Convention, and he looked at her and he said, a republic, if you can keep it. And Christie made that quote right here in that speech where he ended his race. And that's the situation we're at now. All right. So whatever else I say, whatever other, I want to be as clear as possible. If I was a bit repetitive, forgive me, but I want to be clear that those are the stakes of this election. So whatever problems you have with Joe Biden, you don't have to love all his policies. Maybe you think he's too old. You don't like this or that. You didn't like how he was really against marijuana before, or was for some pretty tough on crime legislation that didn't turn out as well as we had hoped at the time. He had hoped. He certainly has acknowledged that. No politician's perfect, but this guy, I mean, we can talk about how good a job he's actually done in reality, not the perception. The economy's bouncing back big time. But that's for later. Let's talk about Iowa right now, okay? We have a situation in Iowa where the best pollster in the business is Ann Selzer, and she is based in Iowa. She works with the Des Moines Register, the premier newspaper in Iowa. And she came out with her big poll that always comes out just before the Iowa election. And it's the gold standard, and it's almost always very accurate. And what we got from her with Iowa was 48% Trump, 20% Haley, 16% DeSantis, 8% Vivek, a couple other people 1%. So that doesn't even count, really. But 48 Trump, 20 Nikki Haley, 16 DeSantis. Now, earlier, DeSantis had been the clear number 2 for some time, and Haley had been trailing him quite a bit in Iowa. And Iowa's much more conservative than New Hampshire, where Haley's the clear number 2, and in some polls is pretty close to Trump. Others not as much. That's in Iowa. There's another poll that came out with very similar numbers and margins to the Seltzer poll, and then there were 2 other recent polls for Iowa, which had essentially DeSantis and Haley tied, and Trump with a similar or even larger lead. So I can even tell you a little bit of those numbers. You have one poll that was conducted January 5th to 10th, where Trump was at 55 and DeSantis and Haley were tied at 14 each. Insider Advantage, you have Trump 51, DeSantis 17, Haley 17. So you have 2 polls where Trump's way up and Haley and DeSantis are tied, and you have another one, 2 other ones, including the Seltzer, the gold standard one, where Trump's a little lower, Nikki's a little higher, and DeSantis is a little lower. Now, you might be thinking, okay, Nikki's going to come in second. All right, that's interesting. Except, you know what? We have a weird thing happening. Most of you listening to this, when you vote, you'll vote in the primary. Okay? And that means you show up, or maybe you mail something in, or you show up, you go in, you vote, no one's looking at you, you're not talking to anybody, you're quiet, you're by yourself, you got your own secret ballot, no one's looking at how you're voting, you're not telling anyone how you're voting, you're not having a discussion, you're not listening to any presentations, there's no give and take, there's no back and forth, you go in, you vote, you leave. It takes a few minutes, unless you're like me and live in Montgomery County, where the local issues are pages and pages of candidates and propositions. But most people, it's pretty straightforward and simple. Well, Iowa's holding a caucus. Now, these caucuses, I've written before, caucuses truly are an abomination. I'll post a great article by Christopher Hitchens from years back, which showed, which argued correctly that they're terrible and undemocratic. And the problem with Iowa caucuses in the past, especially on the Democrats, all right, on the Democrats' side of things, and it was so bad last time, they've gotten rid of them. They essentially have them for some setup and window dressing and local structural things about the party, but they've gotten rid of the caucuses as the way people vote for president, and they actually have a mail-in primary situation, essentially. But before, not only did you show up and have to listen to presentations from all the different candidates, including from people from the candidates' campaigns, sometimes the candidates themselves, but usually, because there's over 1,600 precincts, usually someone from the community who was been recruited by the campaign or chose to represent a particular campaign, and then make a passionate plea why you should vote for that person. And this can go on for a while, and there's some back and forth. And in the Democrat side, there's more than one round of voting where people go to different parts of a gym or a church hall or wherever they are to do this. And you see where everyone's voting, and you try to persuade people to change their votes after like a certain round. And there's like a threshold for what percent you have. So if you're on that threshold and you're not going to end up qualifying for delegates, those people are kind of up for grabs unless they're really stubborn. And it's just kind of chaotic, and it can be big swings from one round to the next. And it's all about peer pressure in many ways, and arguing and who has the most enthusiasm, right? Because this takes hours, and this is a weeknight where not a lot of people have time to spend hours doing this, let alone to get there, wait in line, and all that. So, and I have a friend that I met in Jordan who was Syrian, and he hated Bashar Assad as the butcher of his people who mass murdered his own people by hundreds of thousands. Bashar Assad and Saddam Hussein, since everyone's focused on Gaza right now, and they should be, but just for comparison, Saddam Hussein and Bashar Assad each killed more Muslims and Arabs and more of their own countrymen each than Israelis have killed in over a century of conflict with Israelis / the Jewish community before there was an Israel, in over a century of conflict with Palestinians and other Arabs. The death toll's not even close. That's how awful Bashar Assad is. He hated Bashar Assad, understandably. He wanted to see him overthrown. He wanted a democracy for his country. But he was going back home with a friend who was, I think, Jordanian, someone who wasn't Syrian. And what happened is, before they got on the bus to go back to Jordan, the authorities came. Oh, hey, have you voted yet for Bashar Assad? Yeah, go vote for Bashar Assad now. Come on, go. And who's your friend? Yeah, he should go vote too. The guy wasn't even Syrian. But those were 2 votes for Bashar Assad. And this guy did it without hesitation, this friend, because he knew his family would be at risk of pressure, losing their jobs, arrest, torture, murder at the hands of the regime if he did not do those things. And I know if he didn't vote for Bashar Assad, and I know a woman who stays anonymous because she has family back in Syria, but she's very outspoken against Assad, but she doesn't identify who she is because she's worried about her family. This is why we have a secret ballot in the United States, so you're not subject to the pressures of your community. What if you have a crush on somebody and they're trying to persuade you to vote one way, or you see that everybody but you or 10 other people are thinking something? Are you going to let the fact that a bunch of other people think one way going to, because it's not just about that one precinct. This is 1,600 precincts, and how it all turns out and adds up, it can be interesting. But when you're feeling the pressure in your one little area from your friends, neighbors, relatives, people you live with, that you see every day, that you go to school with, that you work with, because again, these are all based on the physical geographic communities, these different precincts, and you caucus with your precinct. And they would go different parts of the room for different candidates. So at least the Republicans, it's simpler with them, but you're still sitting there in front of your peers, your neighbors, your friends, coworkers, classmates. You're still there. You're still listening to these different presentations. There are opportunities for informal kind of discussion, because this is a whole process that takes time before you actually get to vote, and you end up voting by writing a name on a blank piece of paper. But it's still not really the same as a secret ballot. There's this whole process. There's this whole presentation, and it could be very important people in your community. It could be your boss giving a speech on behalf of a candidate, and then he sees you, and he's wondering how you voted, and he's gonna, it's not ideal, right? And the thing is, because it's not a quick in and out vote, it takes hours, and there can be all kinds of logistical issues and delays and whatever. It takes hours. And in this case, you've got a situation where the wind it's going to be below freezing almost all over the state. And in many places, the wind chill is going to get to minus 20 something, minus 30 something. They're saying it could be as low as minus 45. You can get frostbite in 10, 20 minutes in situations like that if you got people stuck waiting outside, because a lot of people show up. So you know what it takes to come out in the middle of the night with temperatures like that in Iowa? And this is by far the coldest it's ever been for any caucus, Iowa caucus. You gotta have a lot of enthusiasm. So this is where the polling, and the closest it's ever been before for a caucus was 25 degrees or 16. Those are the 2 coldest. This is going to be average temperature -4, and that doesn't include the wind chill. This is where the polling comes in, because among Trump supporters, who's at 48%, what percent are extremely enthusiastic? 49%. Let me repeat that. 49% are extremely enthusiastic among Trump supporters. Very enthusiastic, 39%. Okay? Now let's go to Ron DeSantis, Nikki's big competition for the number 2 spot, because they're trying to have some momentum going into other states, and maybe in their fantasy world they catch up to Trump in this national contest. Not just New Hampshire. Nikki, I'm talking to you. Nikki, what's the Civil War about? Couldn't say slavery. Quick and easy. DeSantis versus Trump's extremely enthusiastic 49%. DeSantis is at 23% enthusiastic. That's less than half Trump's. And very enthusiastic, he's got the same levels, 39. Okay? But now let's go to Haley. Extremely enthusiastic, 9% to DeSantis' 23 and 49. Very enthusiastic, 30 to DeSantis' 39 and Trump's 39. And remember, Trump, 48, Haley, 20, DeSantis, 16. But think about those enthusiasm numbers. Think about a lot of people that might not make it out because it's too damn cold. Think about how little enthusiasm there is for Nikki, and how enthusiasm is always a factor with caucuses, way more than just regular voting, because you're asked to do so much more. You're asked to engage so much more and spend so much more time. There's a very good chance that a lot of her supporters don't come out in minus 45 wind chill, or 30, or minus 20, or 50, whatever it is. It's going to be terrible. There's a good chance that the Trump people come out and overrepresent themselves because of how enthusiastic they are. And relative to Haley, there's a good chance that DeSantis is overrepresented. So you have the first choice among all voters, including those who are not enthusiastic or mildly enthusiastic. And yeah, Haley's at 20 to DeSantis is 16, but that's a very, as Ann Selzer points out in the write-up of this by the Des Moines Register, which I'll post, that's a weak second place, where it's almost like DeSantis is, it might be more likely that he comes out higher than her, even though that poll, because again, the caucus is a weird thing. It's not just voting. So it's a very weak second place. She's vulnerable to DeSantis because he's got way more enthusiasm than she does, and then Trump's got way more enthusiasm than both of them. So that is very telling. And just to be clear, Trump may also have some issues, not because of enthusiasm, but logistically, a lot of his support comes from rural counties. And if those roads aren't cleared from snow, then they could have some issues getting to the caucus sites at night, depending on where we're talking about. But again, they're going to be the ones that have enthusiasm, and maybe they'll even coordinate plowing or get their own shovels. Who knows? But there could be some logistical issues for his people, not related to enthusiasm, but to blocked roads covered in snow. So while some logistical issues could bring about a dent in Trump's support, maybe a little more than that, I do think that the Iowa officials are going to do everything they can to get those roads clear, with probably some volunteer help too, because this is the biggest thing that happens to Iowa. It's like their World Cup every 4 years. It puts them on the map, and nobody can find them other than this time. No offense to anybody from Iowa, but it's just true. It's a very small, sparsely populated state in the middle of a landlocked part of the country. It is what it is. Sure, there's many lovely people in Iowa, not denigrating them. I'm just saying this is a big deal for them. They're going to work hard to get that resolved if snow is an issue. So I do think in the end that the enthusiasm gap is going to be much more of a factor than snow on the roads. And the thing is, again, I was very conservative. They had a poll coming out of Iowa, and other polls are similar. I mean, they love Trump's really racist rhetoric about immigration. Like, the overwhelming number of Republican voters in Iowa love that. They're not the moderates of New Hampshire who are turned off by Trump's extremism. They like him for his extremism, okay? So Haley is seen as a moderate in so many other ways. ways. And again, relative to DeSantis and Trump, she is, but she's still pretty extreme. But she's, they don't want her kind of politics in Iowa. They don't want her type of conservatism in Iowa. That's not what they want. They want Trump DeSantis. And then you got Vivek relative to Haley. Vivek's only at 8%. That's the first choice. He's got 18% second choice. Ron DeSantis, 20% are looking at him as their second choice. 12% are looking at Trump as their second choice. And Nikki Haley's just at 14 for the second choice. So she only comes in third, a little bit behind Trump, because again, his people are so committed. So both Vivek and Ron have more potential gain from other voters that might change their mind than Haley does in this poll again. So Haley does not have enthusiastic support, and she's not first or even second when it comes to second choice for voters. So none of that bodes well. And what that suggests to me is that she's at 14% second choice, right? Well, if Trump's the second choice at 12, we're talking some Vivek or DeSantis people that could switch. And maybe if the Vivek people are paying attention and realizing how little support he has, you could see Trump's numbers grow and Vivek's shrink. Or you could see Vivek's grow a little bit because of enthusiasm that Haley doesn't have, because he's a very weird, polarizing figure who draws some pretty intense support among a very small, narrow group of people, right? And then you have DeSantis, who's the second choice. So maybe you have some Vivek people who are thinking DeSantis is a number 2. And then Vivek himself is the 18% second highest second choice. That could be some Trump people or some DeSantis people, most likely. Definitely not a lot of Haley people, I think. I think Haley's in her own little lane there at this point. But there's an overlap between the other 3 candidates. And people like to gravitate towards the winner. And the fact that, a lot of these DeSantis people in this poll were assuming he was going to stay second place where he was. So just the fact that he came in third in this poll, he may lose some support to Trump, not to Haley. That's the thing. So DeSantis could either overperform, but if he underperforms, that's going to see an even bigger boost to Trump. Same thing with Vivek. So either of them could overperform their polls, but if they don't, their defections are not going to Haley. They're going to Trump. So this is not a good situation for Haley. And if she comes in third by more than a few points, it could be really bad for her. Although New Hampshire has a habit of just trying to say F you to Iowa. But if she has a bad showing, it could affect. I mean, a lot of people are still making their minds up in New Hampshire, right? Second state to vote. And they have a regular primary. And the Democrats have a primary in Nevada, but the Republicans are sticking with a caucus. And I'll talk about that in a little bit too. But the point is that given the weather, the extreme weather, given the enthusiasm issues and everything else I just laid out, Haley could be in trouble. I think it's a long shot she comes in fourth, but if Vivek really overperforms and she craters a bit, she may end up in fourth. But she could probably very likely end in third place. And then where are the margins? How much is Trump going to crush it? They could all look, people like to gravitate towards a winner. Some people that were saying, I support Haley or Vivek or any of these other people might be saying, Trump's maybe going to collapse or something with all these bad press about this and that. Seeing him up as much as he is still at the end just before, there might be a bit of sort of a big defection to him, and he might end up getting 60 instead of, or 55, or, and some polls had him as high as that in the 50s, right? One of the polls did have him at 51 and 55 were 2 of the Iowa polls, besides the Seltzer poll. So, I have more faith on Seltzer than anybody else. She's been really good. She's really up. 538 a long time ago did profiled her, why she's the best in the business. And, but she's also saying this is how it could shift. She's pointing out the weakness of Haley, and these enthusiasm dynamics and the second choice dynamics are important to look at. And she captures all that in her poll. So think we said enough about Iowa at this point, because Iowa, it's either just going to be does what everybody else does, or it's going to be an anomaly, but it's not going to really tectonically shift much of anything. New Hampshire's a little bit more interesting because some polls have Haley within striking distance, others have her farther away from Trump, but a respectable second. But then the third state coming up is Nevada, where this is crazy. I don't understand how the Haley campaign did this. And I don't, it speaks to her leadership and organizational abilities, frankly, because this is a big oversight. The Democrats in the state legislature led a push to get rid of caucuses because, like I said, caucuses are pretty awful. They're not democratic. They're an abomination. They take up way too much time. One person, one vote, secret ballot. That should just be how it is. So the Democrats are done with that. They're doing the primary. But the Republican Party didn't want to go along with that. And they're the ones who decide how their nominees, delegates get allocated. And so the Republican Party there decided, yeah, we're doing this through the caucus and we're boycotting the primary. And so Trump and Vivek and Christie and DeSantis all said, okay, we're not doing the primary either. So their names are not in the ballot for the primary. And remember, the primary doesn't count, even though the primary is going to be more representative than any kind of caucus. The primary doesn't count because it doesn't have the blessing of the party. So guess who's taking part in the primary and not the caucus, and will not be on the ballot in the caucus, even though people could write her in? Nikki Haley. What a catastrophic mistake, because she's going to need some momentum going into South Carolina, her home state where she was governor, where Trump is crushing her and everybody else. And what's going to happen is she's going to get crushed in Nevada, and Trump, in some of the polling in Nevada, Trump 73, DeSantis 8. Haley isn't even on the she's not even being polled because she's not on the she's not being polling in there because, again, I told of the situation that I explained. Right? That's a pretty extreme poll. Let's look at a couple other of all the Nevada polls I looked at have had Trump up ridiculous amounts because it's a casino town. He's Trump. It was 78 to 8 DeSantis, 75 to 15 DeSantis, 67 Trump, 10 DeSantis, 65-12. It's only been getting bigger, that margin. And DeSantis is in single digits, and Trump's at 73 in the latest Emerson College poll, and then 75 to... So he's going to win a blowout in Nevada. That's going to give him his sails some wind going into South Carolina. Again, Haley's own state. All right? And I've been saying for years, Iowa and New Hampshire should not be. And thankfully, the Democrats changed up things so that Iowa and New Hampshire are not leading us off. And we're not even having a competitive primary. But in South Carolina, right? Haley was being beaten by DeSantis a while ago. All right? But, polls from November to now, all right? 48 Trump, Haley 19. 64 Trump, 31% Haley. 53%, 24% Haley. 57%, 19% Haley. 49%, 23% Haley. Not all these polls are equal, but I'm just giving you the numbers. 54% Trump, 25% Haley. That's from early January. Those are huge leads for Trump in Haley's home state. And it's not any better for DeSantis, by the way, when you come to Florida. But this is what's going to happen, folks. Trump's going to crush it in Iowa. There's a chance, not zero, that Haley does come in second and close in New Hampshire, or maybe even beats him in New Hampshire. Then she's going to get crushed in Nevada. She's not even on the ballot there. And then South Carolina is number 4. And then we have Super Tuesday. Okay? Where Trump's already leading in almost all these states, and it's not even going to be close. It just isn't. So it really is ridiculous that there's all this time being spent on Iowa, and look, you're going to hear all this stuff tomorrow. You hear all this stuff about New Hampshire, and it's just part of it is that it's like a circus. It's a business. There's all this money being spent. There's the process that's drawn out instead of everyone voting on the same day because it gives all this hullabaloo and coverage and this and that, and it's just, a lot of the extreme attention going to Iowa and New Hampshire is not merited, honestly. And we're going to see how other states were going to vote regardless how they were, regardless of really what happens in, New Hampshire's not going to be terribly influenced by Iowa because they're very different people, but there still could be some influences in terms of some effect between one state, New Hampshire to the other. I can't see DeSantis or Haley doing anything in Nevada, and Trump's going to have an absolute blowout in Nevada, and that's going to be the headlines going into South Carolina. So if Nikki Haley loses in Iowa to Trump by a large margin, let's give her New Hampshire. Let's say she wins in New Hampshire. Fine. She's not going to win big. It would be very close if somehow she pulled off a win. Then she gets absolutely demolished. And just remember, Biden didn't do great in either Iowa or New Hampshire. He walked away with the nomination because, again, those states aren't very representative of the Democrats in particular. Iowa's more representative of Republicans than New Hampshire's. New Hampshire's really weird like that. And it's one of the only. The thing about New Hampshire is anybody can, independents can participate in the primary there. That's not the case in most of the other Republican states, and most of her supporters from independents, not Republicans. And it's the Republican primary, so that might matter. It's a little bit like Bernie. He got more independents than Hillary and Joe, but you're trying to win the Democratic nomination and you're losing badly among Democrats to both those candidates, you're not going to win the Democratic nomination. So if Haley is 1 for 4, and the one would be a very small state with very few delegates that doesn't represent the rest of the Republican electorate, and one of those losses, and they're all big losses, is her home state, South Carolina. There's no point. She may as well drop out. I mean, she may as well see what's going to happen and go to Super Tuesday to roll the dice. But those are not good odds. Ladies and gentlemen, I would never tell you to go into a casino and bet on the odds that she would have after being 1 for 4, if she's even that. She could be 0 for 4. And then when Ron is not going to... Here's the other thing. This is what's funny. Let's say Ron has a decent night and comes in second, even though he polled in third in half the polls. New Hampshire, just like Iowa's a bad state for Nikki Haley, New Hampshire's a bad state for Ron because it's very moderate. So this is what's funny. There's a chance that Haley does get a little bit of boost out of Iowa, but not that big a boost. She's not going to win Iowa. Just put it that way. And she's going to lose bad to Trump. Let's say DeSantis comes in second and surprises people, and Haley underperforms. That could affect what's going on in New Hampshire, but it's not going to help him in New Hampshire much at all because he's already so low there. He is not popular there. So the two possibilities that we're looking at with something that could affect either of these candidates in terms of them overperforming or underperforming. You'd have DeSantis overperforming in Iowa, but not getting a boost in New Hampshire, or really Nevada from it, or South Carolina. You have Haley doing well or overperforming in Iowa, and maybe getting a little bit more in New Hampshire, but then that doesn't really translate to anything else for her, most likely, after what's going to happen to her in Nevada just before South Carolina. I mean, maybe if she wins New Hampshire, even though she's still going to get blown out in Nevada, maybe she can narrow the gap somewhat in South Carolina, where she's, again, I read the numbers before, she's down by a lot. But if she still loses her home state, even if it's close, which I really think there's very little to no chance it will be close. She'd be lucky to come within 10, and I don't think that's going to happen. South Carolina is a lot more like, as far as the Republican electorate, because the large black population in South Carolina is not Republican. It's a lot more like Iowa than New Hampshire. So, maybe in some world, she wins New Hampshire, still gets blown out in Nevada, and she still makes somehow a respectable rise in South Carolina. But South Carolina is Trump country. It just is. So, frankly, I'm thinking it's far more likely that Trump will blow her out, even if she does rise a bit in South Carolina. It's far more likely than she'll really close the gap and just lose to him. And even then, she's still losing in a state where she's from and she was governor. I can't see her overtaking him. And then how does she sell herself to the rest of the country where she doesn't have any of those advantages that she had in South Carolina being the governor there? She wasn't the governor anywhere else. She's not going to have that type of support in these other places. Not among the Republican electorate in 2024 that has been dominated by Trump for years. And I just don't see any situation where Trump doesn't crush Haley in South Carolina as well as DeSantis. And then what do any of these other people have going into Super Tuesday other than to just roll the dice? But it's going to be even more humiliating for them. Trump's going to run away with the nomination very soon after Super Tuesday. And it's just, it just shows you that the way these states are configured, the first four, 3 out of the 4 overwhelmingly favor Trump. And you have these other people trying to be competitive in some of them, and there's only one of them who's competitive in one of those states, and it's the least like the other 4 in terms of the setup. The caucuses, as I mentioned, favor the most enthusiastic. If there was a primary, Trump's numbers wouldn't be quite as high, but because it's going to be a caucus, he's going to be the only person with a lot of momentum going into South Carolina. A tight win in New Hampshire for Haley is not going to translate to conservative voters who strongly prefer Trump and are more enthusiastic about him, even though she's been the governor. And again, he's beating DeSantis in Florida too. It's the same thing with DeSantis. He's not going anywhere and she's not going anywhere. But what's going to happen is we're going to have this kabuki theater where it looks like maybe Haley, this is going to be like 2016 all over again with the conservatives behind Ted Cruz. They're going to prop him up. They're going to say he's the alternative. We can do it. Let's get behind her. These are the never Trump Republicans, the honorable Republicans who at least have some shred of the idea that the Constitution actually needs to be protected and defended and will understand what it means. Your George Conways, your Adam Kinzingers, these people who are really honorable people, John Kasich, they're going to do everything they can to prop Haley up, and it's not going to do much of anything at all. It just isn't. So that's that. So maybe it takes a little longer. Maybe there's a little bit of hullabaloo and buzz about Haley because somehow she wins New Hampshire, and there's all this nonsense about, overperform. Trump's still going to be way ahead of any of these people tomorrow in Iowa. Way ahead. So these people aren't competitive against him in Iowa. One person's competitive in New Hampshire, and nobody's competitive with him in Nevada or South Carolina and most of the other states. So I don't know how anyone can explain to me how that's going to change. Because you can't. Unless some health scare or something. That's the only, if Trump's alive and kicking it, and it's the same Trump that he is now, he's going to run away with the nomination. Now, let's talk about the Democratic side of things. There's no meaningful challenger to Biden, and if someone wanted to really challenge Biden and felt they had a good chance and that was good for the party and that would help our chances to win in November, it would have happened. There isn't. Despite the perception and the awful media coverage, okay, Biden's accomplished more in his first 2 years than any president since Lyndon Baines Johnson. And guess what's happening now, folks? The economy's getting a lot better. Inflation's still going down. Wages have been going up for a lot of this year. The consumer price index has gone down to be lower than wages recently. Housing construction is up. Mortgage rates are down. The Fed has succeeded in giving us a soft landing. There's no one's talking about recession anymore that has any credibility. Job growth has been phenomenal, historic. Unemployment, phenomenal, historic. And inflation's been, over the course of a longer period of time, been steadily going down under Biden. And I expect all these trends to more or less continue. So guess what's going to happen in the economy? It's going to keep getting better. And eventually, with the inflation going down enough relative to where it was before, people are slow. It takes some time for things to sink in. But people's perception of the economy will start to catch up. Their consumer spending was quite good over the holiday season. So that's an indication that that is already going to happen. And there's also a lot of young people right now. I talked about this with Rula in particular. I'm going to offer some more commentary on Gaza and Israel and Palestine, Hamas and all that soon. But the point is that things are not only moving well domestically for Biden, but I'm someone who lived in Jordan, which borders Israel, for over 5 years. I spent a lot of time, over 6 months collectively, in Israel and Palestine during my 5 years there. And I had a study abroad class years before in Israel and Palestine. I've been all over Israel and Palestine other than Gaza. But I've certainly studied a lot about Gaza and have a better understanding than a lot of other folks do about what's going on there. And it's a horrible situation. And as I said in my podcast with Rula, and as she made very clear, it's quite understandable that many people have a perception that Joe Biden has facilitated a quote unquote genocide. I don't think that's the right word. Mass killing, yes. That the perception is that that's our intention. That's what we want to do. Now, anyone who's really followed this knows that Biden's been pleading and begging practically Netanyahu and his government to do things differently, to value Palestinian life and prioritize it more, to rein in, to allow more humanitarian aid in. That they have not. It's not on us. It's on the Israelis. And, to be clear, they're justified in defending themselves against Hamas. But at this point, Hamas isn't much of a threat right now when you have Gaza surrounded by as many soldiers as they have it surrounded by. They can't come back out like they did before when Netanyahu took almost all the soldiers away from the border and allowed that weakness to exist that could be exploited. It should never have existed. And Israelis know this, and they blame him, by the way. So I'm not going to get into all this stuff now, but just suffice to say that there's a lot of patience running out. Axios and Barak Ravid were reporting, but it's been obvious for months. There's a lot of patience that's wearing thin within different American officials and Biden administration, Congress. There's a movement where Israel's losing support in the United States, including among some of their biggest offenders on the more sensible side of things within the U.S. government. And what's going to happen is, it may not be next week, it may not be 3 or 4 weeks from now, maybe it's not even next month, but within a couple of months, there's going to be a huge shift. There's not that much more for Israel to really do. They quickly took over huge parts of the urban areas of Gaza where almost all the people and the Hamas people are. The tunnels are hard to deal with and hard to find. But that doesn't mean that they're not easy to kind of seal off or minimize the effect when you do what Israel's doing now. There are only so many more targets and so many more reasons to keep fighting. And so the war is going to wind down relatively soon. The question is how many more dead Palestinians, and for the most part, there will be some more Israeli casualties, but they have been so light after October 7th through now, and it's really all over 30,000 dead Palestinians in Gaza, because there are 7,000 or more, probably more at this point, that are unaccounted for or missing because they're buried under rubble, and they're never coming back. they're dead, but they actually have confirmed almost 24,000 killed. And a lot of those, this is from the Palestinian Health Ministry. Let's just be clear about something with that. Sorry, it's from the Gaza Health Ministry, I should say, which is run by Hamas, but is, despite that fact, has been quite credible for years with the numbers it gives out, and still is thought to be by all the people who actually have respectable, serious views and opinions on this and aren't just being propagandists. Those numbers are still accurate, or are expected to be accurate in the absence of anything else, even if they're not completely accurate. And in the past, they've been close to the IDF numbers, they've been close to UN and NGO numbers. So, though most of the Gaza Health Ministry's numbers are not dead Hamas fighters, because those people are fighting the Israelis in war zones, in the battle areas. That's not where the Gaza health officials are going and recovering civilian bodies. That's where the Israelis are fighting and the Gaza health officials are staying away from. So a lot of the Hamas fighters that have been killed by Israel are not part of this total being given out. The vast majority of the total being given out is almost certainly civilians, and it's already 70% women and children. So it's not almost, it is. So it's a horrific amount of dead. And then there's the 7,000, probably more than that, unaccounted for, and apparently 60,000 something wounded. It's horrific. It can't go on much longer like this. And what's going to happen, Israelis have blamed Netanyahu for this, and his approvals are down in like the mid-20s, with like 3/4 against him, willing to vote against him, or wanting him to resign even. In a bunch of these polls, the polls have been pretty consistent. His I don't know if it's 3/4 willing to vote against him, but 3/4 who blame him, 3/4 who want him to step aside, 3/4 who want him to resign, and like mid-20s support. He is done. It may not be today. Well, it's not today. It's not tomorrow. It's when the Israelis decide they're ready to move past the war and deal with their politics. And when they do deal with their politics, he's done. So what's going to happen? The guy who has been more to stoke violence and instability and to promote Hamas at the expense of its rival, the secular Fatah, which has agreed, that runs the West Bank nominally, which has recognized Israel's right to exist for years, decades, which has renounced violence against Israelis and has renounced terrorism and engages in security cooperation with Israel that has paid off for years, according to Israeli senior security officials. Not Netanyahu when he lies and distorts things, because again, he doesn't want a Palestinian state. He wants to control all of that. And his fanatical, extremist, bigoted, messianic, right-wing allies want to colonize Palestinian land in the West Bank and make it Israeli territory. This is not a man you can trust, but he's on his way out. So what's going to happen? Right now, everyone's mad, or a lot of people are mad at Joe Biden because they see him as the reason that Israel's getting away with what they see as mass murder. And Netanyahu's in charge. But what's going to happen in a few months? Hamas is going to be essentially destroyed or so degraded in Gaza that they're not going to be much of a factor in the governance of Gaza. They're not going to be able to mount much violence from Gaza anymore. And Netanyahu's going to be gone. So Hamas is gone from Gaza. Netanyahu's gone from the prime ministership. All of a sudden, all the stuff that Biden's been doing to support Israel, all the credibility he gained with the Israeli people, which is a lot. You saw literal families of the hostages that Hamas has taken, disgustingly, into Gaza after they committed their pogrom, the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. The family members of these hostages are thanking Joe Biden out loud. They're not even mentioning Bibi on television. Bibi is the nickname for Netanyahu. The guy who said, I'm the Bibi sitter in a commercial, I'm going to keep you and your kids safe. Well, he didn't. So he'll be gone, and Biden has enough leverage, I think, to what's going to happen, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. He's going to fly into the Knesset. He's going to fly into Israel, and he's going to speak to the Israeli parliament, the Knesset. He's going to address Israeli voters live on television and the lawmakers there. He's going to say, you've got to move towards a two-state solution. I stood by you. I gave you all these weapons and support when nobody else would, and very few people would. I helped you get rid of Hamas and Gaza as a threat, and now I'm asking you, I'm telling you, I'm begging you, for the sake of peace, for your children's sake, for all our sakes, for the sakes of the Palestinians too, let's move forward on a two-state solution. And I do not think there's an Israeli politician who will be able to become prime minister under those conditions, who will have the chutzpah, it's Yiddish for essentially arrogance, balls, whatever you want to say, the gall to say no to the United States after what the United States has done for Israel. And I'm hoping and thinking it could be Lapid, who is still committed to the two-state solution. And so what's going to happen is, again, a lot of young people are disaffected. There's a great New York Times piece, which I'll post, which I said before it even came out to people, that Israel's a big part of the reason why Biden's numbers are so low and Trump's are higher, because a lot of people are mad at him, particularly in the swing state of Michigan, where a lot of Arab Americans live. But it's not just Arab Americans; it's young people and people of color who are identifying more Palestinians today than in years past. So Biden's base is upset with him over Israel. But in a few months, with Bibi gone, the war over, and things moving towards a Palestinian state, and peace and progress towards peace and diplomatic breakthroughs happening with more moderate Israeli politicians in charge, Biden's going to look a lot different to these people. And I'm not saying they should forget, or that what's happening now doesn't matter and all the death in Gaza doesn't matter. It absolutely does. I'm trying to get into that in future writings of mine. I've had some stuff I've been working on that's just so complicated and in depth and detailed and needs a lot more research. I've been working on it. I'm sorry it hasn't come out yet, but to me, there's genocide's too strong a term for me based on the available evidence. It's not that there's no possibility of it, but it just doesn't seem like there are some people who are speaking in those terms and would like to see that, and they have power in the Israeli government, but it's not clear to me that the decided upon policy of the government as a whole is genocide. And what is clear to me is that there have been war crimes and atrocities committed. They're just ridiculous. Not all mass killing is genocide, okay? But with that over, with the mass killing atrocity, I think it's more clear that Hamas's actions were genocidal because they wiped out huge parts of the population of like whole villages. Now they were just small villages, but they were really trying to ethnically cleanse that whole. They were trying to kill as many people as they could. And these were civilians in their homes. Like these people weren't trying to bomb a target from afar, which we can talk about that. That's also problematic. A lot of people won't make that distinction. But these people went into their homes to go and shoot up these people, to torture them and rape them in person, face to face. Okay? These are people hiding in bomb shelters, and they were just throwing grenades into them. These people did not have weapons. They were combatants. Anyway, just like most of the people in Gaza dying are not combatants. And again, it's not the same as going into a house and shooting people, but bombing it from afar is still something that has to be talked about, which we will at some point. But my whole point about this is that the economy is going to be doing a lot better. The people that are upset with Biden and his coalition over Israel and Palestine, things are going to look a lot better in just a few months there. Certainly, I would say well before the election. So there'll be a lot of time for people to process their emotions and to process the changes and to process how Biden's going to be emphasizing the Palestinians now in a way that he hadn't before because of the conflict with Hamas. And then finally, like I said, Trump's going to run ahead of this. Now, a lot of people have not been paying very close attention to the election. I saw a poll recently that said 47% of people hadn't been. I mean, it's just one poll, but that sounds about right to me. A lot of people aren't paying attention yet. And what's going to happen? People aren't that engaged yet. The economy's getting better. The war in the Middle East is going to get better and peter out. And we're still only going to be not even halfway through 2024. And the time when people really start to pay attention more, we're going to be seeing nonstop Trump this, Trump that. People can like Trump more when they see him less. And then they're reminded of how awful he really is. And his rhetoric's getting even worse. And there's going to be violence against attempted violence or violence against judges and other, like there already has been. You already had gunmen try to go into the court in Colorado that took Trump off the ballot. Trump is an insurrectionist. Okay, that's not really up for debate. You may think it is, but then you understand the Constitution or the 14th Amendment. That's a whole other thing to get through. I don't think the Supreme Court's good. They're going to go out of their way to not be seen as deciding this election. So regardless of the basic facts of the 14th Amendment, I don't think he'll be removed successfully from the ballot. But that's going to be an ugly case. Everyone's going to be looking. It's a little bit like the genocide trial with Israel. It's not going to be ruled that Israel committed genocide, but everyone's going to look at all the war crimes they're committing and be like, well, that's still not good. That's like the insurrection case. It's not going to be ruled by the Supreme Court that he's an insurrectionist and has to be taken off the ballot. They may rule that he's an insurrectionist, but it doesn't apply to him because he's president or something nonsense. We'll see. That might be the middle, thread the needle thing that Roberts wants to do, but I don't know. I don't know if that's still pretty bold for the court to label him an insurrectionist. But he is an insurrectionist. That's something that absolutely turned off even people I know who voted for Trump, that turned off people who are independents. And so right now, Joe's not doing great with independents. And that's the key to winning the election. But guess what? We're going to have a period of time coming sooner rather than later after Super Tuesday, because there's going to be contest after contest after contest. We're going to be hearing from Trump every day. We're going to be seeing his insane clown act, clown fascism. We're going to be seeing that day after day after day, and then people are going to be comparing Joe Biden not to just, oh, I wish there was someone else. No, they're going to be comparing him to Trump, and all of a sudden, he's going to look a lot better compared to that. The economy is going to be getting better. The war in the Middle East is going to be getting better, and we're going to be seeing not just the political coverage of Trump, but he's got these multiple cases that are all damning against him. He's about to have probably the Trump organization, his business for years, his life, destroyed by the New York court system because of the fraud it perpetuated, and that ruling's coming soon, and that's going to bring him down in stature a bit, not among his fanatic fans, maybe even a few New Hampshire voters, but again, the whole point is that New Hampshire is not going to really matter. With the independents who are going to vote in a general election, I'm not talking about the New Hampshire primary anymore, but in the general election, these cases are going to keep going on and on. He's probably going to be convicted in at least one of them, maybe more than one, before the election. That's going to be a real stain on him. And independent voters, who are the ones who decide these elections in the end, they're going to come home back to Joe. Because the contrast will be so much more front and center, living and breathing Trump's insanity day after day after day. People can remember the exhaustion and the fatigue, and they're saying, you know what, I don't want to go back there. And grass looks greener now because inflation. That's basically it. Everyone's looking at everything bad because of inflation. The media is covering everything horribly because of inflation. Inflation, as if it's the only thing that matters. The rest of the economy is very impressive, and inflation has been getting better steadily. Steadily, people, steadily, and it's going to keep likely getting better. And if that's true, and especially with, I would say, even if it stays where it is now, but I do think the signs are just strong that the economy is going to keep getting better for this year. But, even if it stayed where it is now, it's still a lot better than it was before. And there's still the circus act that they're going to have to look at every day, but it's going to be a fascistic horror show, and there's going to be violence. And there's going to be all these court cases. Every day we're going to be hearing about that stuff. Once those trials actually start, former president himself on trial, the one in Georgia is going to be televised. None of that's good publicity. Going back and revisiting the 2020 election is not going to be good. Stealing classified documents and refusing to return them is not going to win him more support among independents. He's going to lose support. If not his base, which is unlikely, still. Independents, people, that's how elections are made up. So factor all this in. Factor in that's only January, and we have until early November. So we still have close to 11 months. More than 10 and a half months as of now still. There's no indication that the economy is going to be getting significantly worse and that will probably be improving. There's no serious person, I think, who thinks that the war is still going to be raging for 10 months. Gaza's only so big. Israel can only do so much there before it's over. And we're going to be stuck with Trump on our TV screens every day when everyone's starting to actually pay attention again. And the polls only really start to matter in the head-to-head presidential matchup in the summer, around the conventions, around July. Starting in July, August, September, October, that's when the polls are going to start mattering. And I'm telling you, the polls are going to evolve between now and then because of all the things I'm saying. So, it's going to be Trump. It's going to be Biden. Biden's going to win. I'm very confident of that. And I'm a huge Biden fan. Confession, I interned for him. A huge Hillary fan. I loved her more probably than any white man other than Bill Clinton. Only 31% of white men voted for her in 2016. I was one of those 31%. Very, very enthusiastic, not reluctant in the slightest. But I recognized that she had weaknesses given what was being thrown at her in the situation, from Comey and the Russians to the media coverage and Jill Stein and Gary Johnson, people just thinking, oh, Trump can't win. All those things hurt her big time. I was more nervous than most Democrats. I still thought she was going to win, but I was more nervous than most Democrats, and I recognized it could be quite close. A lot of other people didn't. I did quite some time before, not just towards the end, but when the polls tightened, but really the whole time I was worried. Bernie dragging his feet and his Bernie bros being awful, all that stuff contributed. I am looking at the fundamentals here, and I'm just very confident. I really am. I'm very confident. I think you're even going to see Christie endorse Biden. I think you're going to see maybe Asa Hutchinson, maybe John Kasich again. He did the last time. You're going to see a coalition again of independents, Democrats, and moderate Republicans. Very few of those left, but they exist. And I guess the biggest question is, are the progressives and the people who are really upset about Gaza right now, if things get much better there and Biden really takes up the mantle of the Palestinian cause in a way no president has in recent memory, if that happens, is that going to be enough to win them over? I don't think all of them, but I do think enough of them, given the swing in independence we're going to see against Trump. I think we're going to be okay, people. I think fascism won't be defeated. I think the center will hold. The Constitution will survive and not be destroyed by a madman. Rule of law will prevail. Free and fair elections will prevail. There's going to be some shenanigans, though. We gotta be on guard. There could be some individual situations where some really bad things are going to happen, and we have to all fight. We gotta tell everybody we know, you gotta vote. You can't let them steal the election from you by throwing out votes that shouldn't be thrown out, with voter suppression, with insurrection, with alternate delegates and fake electors. We can't let any of that happen. And there has been some progress in that zone to keep that from happening with legislation from Congress recently. But the point is, guys, don't despair. It doesn't look good now. I know it doesn't look good now. But in terms of the polls in January of an election year predicting how people will end up, let's ask President Al Gore or President Hillary Clinton how things looked in January of a certain year. Let's ask George H.W. Bush in his second term. He didn't have one. How's the second term of Jimmy Carter looking? The point is, the polls right now nationally don't mean anything. They do mean something in these contests, but these early contests, the narrative is going to be mostly Trump is kicking ass, but oh, some other person did something. Look at that. And a bunch of people will try to get behind that other person. And, it's not as big a deal as people are going to make it out. Trump's going to win 3 out of these 4 states, and Super Tuesday is going to be a mop up. And the question is, I guess, who's really, truly auditioning for Trump's VP slot? Definitely not Chris Christie. Maybe Nikki Haley, Vivek, Yeah, and it's hilarious that Trump just attacked Vivek because he realizes that he's competing with both Vivek and DeSantis. He's not competing so much with Haley. He just wants to tear Haley down and make her look weaker. But if he can peel a few people away from Vivek, that could make his numbers go up a bit, as I mentioned in Iowa. And anyway, it is what it is. But the point is, people relax. I actually think the fundamentals and history are on our side. I haven't given up faith in this country yet. There's some awful things happening right now. There's some awful things happening in the Middle East. I do think things will get better. I really do. And if you know me, I'm not a natural optimist. So there it is. That's my podcast. That's my 2 cents on Iowa, New Hampshire, the other early states, Nevada and South Carolina, as well as the whole race going down in November between Biden and Trump. I mean, we've already, even with the war in Ukraine, we've already built in some of the shocks from that into our system as it is now, and the Russians don't really have any capability of dramatically altering the course of the war there, so either the Russians are going to kind of hold on and it may end up being a bit of a stalemate for a while, or Ukraine's still got some tricks and surprises up their sleeve for people that they're giving up on them, and I lean heavily in that direction. But it may take, if we can't get more aid to them, it may take us winning Congress back to do that. And by the way, we would have held the House if the New York State delegation hadn't messed up their maps and everything so bad. The New York State situation was ridiculous, but now they're redoing their maps again in a way that will probably help us. And we have a chance to take back the House and then move forward on Biden's agenda in the second term in a way where we won't have to worry about Manchin and Sinema being, the holdup. We'll actually be able to do even more than Joe did in his first 2 years. But we gotta win. We gotta win these House races. We gotta win these Senate races. We gotta win in the states. And the thing is, the Republicans, remember this also. They're still pushing this extremist anti-abortion rights stuff, anti-reproductive rights. That's not, even in Republican states, they're getting crushed. So with that on the ballot in swing states, in the general election in 2024, you're telling me the Democrats are going to lose? People aren't going to vote to take their own rights away. They're not going to vote for the people trying to do it. And they're going to see the economy's better. They're going to see Joe Biden as a peacemaker in the Middle East. And they're going to be enjoying the fruits of this economy more while being horrified by the antics of Donald Trump that they can't get away from or deny anymore. They're going to see them every day. And so these swing voters, they're going to swing. They're going to swing for Joe. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Have a wonderful rest of your